Hi, Brian. I have Jeremy here.
Hi, Brian. Hello.
Jeremy.
Hi, Brian.
How you doing?
Good.
Good.
Okay, so should I begin?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm ready to go.
Okay, yeah. I'd like to say, first of all, thank you for taking the time to answer some questions for my story.
Oh, thank you.
Yep, okay.
My pleasure.
Thanks. So, over the last few days, I've gone to the internet, I've gotten to know your work a little better, and I must say I admire what you do, both as a photojournalist and conservationist. Yeah, I've seen that in the course of your work, you have put on many hats, like a diver, explorer, journalist, sometimes all at once. So, which were you first, and how did it all come together?
Right, good question. Well, I was a diver first, From a very young age, I just dreamed about being an explorer, and an ocean explorer, especially. So I was about 15 years old when I first began scuba diving, and maybe a year or so after that, I attended a diving conference in Boston, near where I live in Boston, and I saw photographers and filmmakers presenting their work, and I realized that was the perfect career for me. I could be an ocean explorer, but I could do it with a camera. And I was a very visual person, and the idea of telling stories with pictures really appealed to me. So it was a very lofty goal. I came from a little working class town in Massachusetts, but that was my dream, to become a National Geographic photographer. So I ultimately went to college and studied photojournalism and photography and film and television documentary work and so forth. But it was not underwater. I still had to sort of teach myself how to do those things underwater. So it was a bit of an evolution, but eventually I started to sell some pictures, and I did stories for diving magazines, and I sold stock photography and did speaking engagements about my work, and slowly but surely built up a portfolio. And then about 18 years ago, I got my first assignment for National Geographic, and that was what I wanted. And it was a big dream, but it was a challenging assignment as well. But I got the pictures; they were happy, and I kept on working with them, and it's been sort of very busy ever since.
Yep. Okay. I read also that you always knew that you wanted to be a Nat Geo photographer from a very young age. Yep. So who or what were some of your influences? Was it a story that you read, or some guy that you knew of?
Well, it was probably both. But I think the moment that I decided that I wanted to be an underwater photographer, I also immediately knew that National Geographic was kind of the Mount Everest of photography. If you were going to be a National Geographic photographer, that would be the best, if you were going to be an underwater photographer. So I looked to the photographers that were working there at the time. One of the guys that inspired me the most was a guy named Bill Kurtzinger. His last name is spelled Curtsinger, Bill Kurtzinger. And the other guy, David Duboulet, who's still there. But these guys were traveling around the world. They were making beautiful pictures and telling stories, and that was definitely a great inspiration. But I was also inspired by, terrestrial photographers, wildlife photographers who were working on land. A guy named Jim Brandenburg was one of the great photographers, and Chris Johns, who ultimately became the editor of National Geographic magazine, but he was a wildlife photographer. These guys were doing great stories, and the idea of being able to do that kind of work really appealed to me.
Okay. So if you had to describe your style, what would you say it is?
That's good. Well, I would say, my style is sort of a blend of celebratory photography, along with more reportage. It's a blend of trying to make beautiful pictures along with images that really help shed light on problems. It's both of those things.
Okay, so you'd say you're a photojournalist first, I guess, that way. I mean,
Yes.
yeah. Okay, it's interesting. Okay, could you tell us about a defining or a positive, memorable moment that you've had in your 30-year career?
Well, there's been, of course, many memorable moments. I mean, there's been fantastic experiences underwater with animals, but in terms of, a sort of a pivotal moment or one that was profound, I think was maybe a story that I did for National Geographic. It was a cover story on the global fish crisis. And this is, looking at the problems of overfishing in the world. And this was a story that I proposed. Almost every story that I do for National Geographic is my idea. It's the stories that I've come up with the ideas. And this one was too. And, it was a very different kind of underwater story. I didn't want it to be just about pretty pictures. I really wanted to show the problems occurring in our world's oceans. And I think I approached it more like a war photographer and made these sort of very graphic images. But I think it was sort of profound in the sense that it got a lot of attention, and it was a different kind of story for Geographic, and I think it helped people realize some of the real problems down there. So that's one that certainly comes to mind. But there's many great moments that I've had.
Yep. Oh, so was this also one of the most heartbreaking, discouraging moments as well?
Yes, that's really a good observation, Jeremy. It really was. I spent almost 2 years working on that story, and I became very depressed. There wasn't a lot of good news.
Yeah.
And I really felt bad about things. But, sort of toward the end, I did another story around the same time as a solution story. It was a story on the value of marine protected areas. And I went to New Zealand, and I covered many of the places that had been protected and saw how well they were doing. They were doing really well. So that was sort of refreshing for me and renewing.
Yep, I would imagine so. So would you say this is also the point where you became interested in some conservation work and in speaking up for the planet or for the seas?
Yeah, it was. But I think I even became interested in those things a little bit earlier. One of the first big stories that I did for National Geographic, where I recognized the ability to include environmental issues within a natural history story, was a story that I began working on in 2002 about harp seals. There's a species of seal that lives in the Canadian Arctic. But, initially I just wanted to do a story about those animals in a few weeks in their year when they migrate down to a part of southern Canada. But as I got involved in the story, I realized there were two big environmental issues. One, they continue to be hunted. Canadians, kill them for their pelts to make coats and hats and mittens. And but maybe even the bigger problem was that climate change was eliminating the ice that they needed to live. And I was able to document both of those things as part of the story. And, that got a lot of attention. And with that, I saw the ability to do other stories. So it was actually after the harp seal story that I did the global fish crisis story. And, so it was sort of an evolution. I started to see these problems. I started to gradually include that in my work, and then it became, more of a thing. But I also realized that, I can't just do stories about doom and gloom. It can't just be bad stuff. You have to show the good stuff too, and I'd obviously much rather photograph just the pretty things. So I try to balance that out and show people why we need to still care,
Yep, for sure, definitely. Okay, so from what I've seen, so much of what happens in the oceans begin on the land. So how do you approach a story holistically if you're engaged to do a story, about the seas, and then you realize that there's a story behind that as well, and it begins on land? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think research is critical, and I often will spend a year or more researching a story before I propose it, before I write the proposal. And I have to talk with many researchers quite often, to understand behaviors of animals, and I have to understand the places that I'm going to go and what's happening in those places, what the logistics will be like, if I have to hire boats or helicopters, or who I'm going to hire to work with. And, there's many different aspects logistically to any story. So that all, as you say, has to happen well in advance of my arrival, because once I get there, there's too many things that I can't control. I can't control the weather or the visibility or if the animals are there. So I have to try to narrow down those odds as much as I can in advance.
I see. Yep. Okay. I've read that you've mentioned, in other interviews, that photography can be a powerful instrument for change, quote unquote. So do you think that's still relevant today as we are inundated with numerous digital pictures? Is the impact still there? With a picture?
That's a really great observation and a good question too. I do think that it is still a very powerful tool for change, because I believe human beings are such visual creatures. I think that, the reason digital photography and all these social media sites have exploded is because we love to look at images, and I think we react emotionally to them. I think since the advent of photography, every great moment in human history, whether it's something good or something bad, has been recorded in a still frame. Even video is powerful, but I once read that the way our brain works, we record video and movies as still frames in our head. So, whether it's man landing on the moon or the Kennedy assassination or Tiananmen Square or whatever it is, I think we have these iconic pictures in our head of what that means, and I think that photography continues to be a powerful tool for change, because when people see something, you can read about it all day long, and that will affect some people, but one single picture of whatever it is can change the equation. Once people see a photograph, it becomes real, and I think that that's the power of photography.
Yeah, true. I think that's true. I think I can identify that completely. Okay.
Right.
So what would you say are some of the challenges of underwater photography that you faced?
Well, there are many challenges. I think, the first one are sort of just the mechanical challenges. My cameras have to go inside an underwater housing, for example. So I can't change lenses. I can't change film or compact flash cards. I'm relegated to whatever it is I go in the water with. So unlike a surface photographer, you can change lens when a subject changes. I can't do that. The other thing is I can only stay underwater as long as the air supply on my back will last. So that's often maybe an hour or less. So I can't sit in a blind and wait for a month for some elusive animal to come by like my terrestrial counterparts. I also can't use very long lenses. Even in the clearest of water, I have to get very close to my subject. I can't use a 600 millimeter lens. So I usually have to get within 1 or 2 meters of my subject to make pictures. And I could never swim fast enough to chase a whale or a dolphin, so they have to let me close. They have to be curious enough about me or not threatened by me to let me close. So all of those are real serious challenges, and visibility can be variable. On any day you can go in the water and the visibility is not very good, or the animals aren't there. I'm doing a shark story and I go to a place and there's no sharks, or the weather is bad. I go to a place for an entire month and every day it's windy and cold and I can't get out in the boat. So, there's a lot of challenges like that that are just mechanical. Every day you have to deal with problems. So, the more time you can spend in a place, obviously, the better. And just trying to be flexible. I mean, try to come up with solutions and find ways of making pictures even when everything isn't going exactly the way you planned.
Oh, that sounds a lot like portraiture to me. Would you say it's kind of like portraiture in the sense that you have to build a rapport with your subject, like the animal, because you have to get so close and you, like you said, you have to let them...
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's very interesting.
Yeah, there's definitely some similarities there. The good thing about portraiture is that, you can do it in any weather.
Yeah.
you can do it in a nice studio. But you're right. You do have to develop a rapport with the person, and you have to sort of get them to relax and be comfortable. And so I think there are some similarities. Yeah.
Yeah. As a photographer myself, I can't begin to fathom what it's like taking photos underwater, like you've described. So how would you describe a typical shoot? And what are the 3 most critical considerations that you have, like the most important ones? Wait, yeah.
First let me describe a typical shoot. First of all, I guess there's no such thing as a typical shoot, but a normal sort of day when I'm in the field is usually about maybe 18 hours long. You're typically up pretty early, and you're out on the boat, or you're diving underwater, or downloading pictures or editing or whatever. So it's a very long day, up early, going to bed very late, and spending as much time as you can, or as I can, in the water or with whatever subject I'm trying to photograph. So, access to your subject is everything, but often that can be the greatest challenge, just having time in front of your subject. We don't have that much time often. So that's, and those days can just go one after another. So I might be in the field for a month, and just, day after day like that, long days, tiring days, physically exhausting, mentally exhausting. And then, your question was the 3 things that are sort of most
critical, I guess.
Or what was it?
The most critical considerations for each shot, like, I'm not sure, like, for example, you need to have the biggest CF card that you have. I don't know. I mean, what's the most important thing? That you've always emptied your CF card or something?
Well, yeah, I mean, if I can, again, so many times I go down and you only see your subject briefly, so I can't fill my compact flash card because I don't have that much time. It's a real luxury for me to have the ability to just shoot over and over again with a subject. Usually I get these sort of fleeting glimpses of animals, or very brief amounts of time to shoot them, so I don't have that time. But the things that I'm trying to do, whether I have a little or a lot of time, is to make a picture that blends sort of grace and gesture and nice light. I'm trying to bring all these elements together to make an image that's very special, that will make somebody stop when they're turning the pages of National Geographic and really want to learn about that story. Hopefully the picture will get them to want to read the actual text and learn something about the subject that I feel is important. So it's about trying to capitalize on those brief moments when hopefully I can use all of my abilities, my talents to come together, and even if it's a brief moment, just to try to make something very special. The difference between an okay picture and a really good one. It's really about using everything you've got at your disposal to make that happen.
I see. So it sounds like it can get pretty fast-paced at times. So, so if you have to, I mean, I'm not sure if this is possible at all, but if you do need to dash and dive, what would your go-to gear be?
My go-to gear?
Yeah.
Well, it would probably be gear that gives me some flexibility. For most of my career, I only used prime lenses. I never used a zoom lens, but in the last 3 or 4 years, I started using a zoom lens, like a 17 to 35, which gives me much greater versatility. I think the zoom lenses today are much, much better than they used to be, so I feel confident using that. And, so I would say sort of the go-to dash and dive gear would be my camera inside a housing, a zoom lens on there, like a 17 to 35, 2 strobes, and with that setup, I can do a lot of things. I can't do everything, but I can do an awful lot, and it's become sort of my bread and butter, as we say, sort of the workhorse system that I use quite often.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay, so final question here.
Okay.
What words of advice would you give to those who wish to follow your path, or those who cite you as an influence?
Right. Well, I would say that if you're interested in doing this kind of work, photojournalism or wildlife photojournalism, I think, you really have to be very passionate. So make sure that it's something that you really love, because it's not all romantic and sexy. It is a lot of hard work, and it can be lonely. I spend 8 or 9 months a year in the field doing these stories, and I've been doing that for 18 years. So you really have to be passionate about what it is you're doing, because I travel with 20 cases of equipment, and I'm on planes and in airports and hotels or boats or camped out in a jungle at the edge of the ocean, and it's not always pleasant.
Yep.
So you really have to love what you do. The other thing I would say is to really come up with a strategy for success. If you want to do this kind of work, really think about what you need to do to get where you want to be. You're probably going to get hired based on your portfolio,
Yep.
for example. So if you want to be a photojournalist, you need to have a portfolio that reflects that you can shoot journalistically. So set goals, have a strategy that says, this is where I am today, this is where I want to be in 10 years, what do I need to do in a year, 5 years, whatever, to sort of achieve those goals and develop a really powerful portfolio. And the other thing that I think is very helpful is to work in places where you have repeatability. So work close to home. I think a mistake a lot of photographers make is they save some money and they try to travel off to places to do what they dream about doing, but they may not have much time to spend there, a week or two. And I think if you work in your own backyard, you can do things that nobody else can do. And you'll be far more effective at that, and your portfolio will reflect it. It'll show that you've done really powerful work. So, I think be passionate, have a good business plan, a good strategy, and begin by working close to home, unless you're independently wealthy. Work in your own backyard, and those are 3 things that can really help get you where you want to be.
Yep. Okay. Just to go a little further on the portfolio, would you say a diverse portfolio would be preferable to a niche portfolio? Like, would you try to capture as wide a breadth of subjects as possible? No. I would not say. I think a wide portfolio is less interesting to a director of photography at a big magazine. I think it's really what you're trying to do. So if I was trying to do what I do right now, if I was a young photographer trying to become an underwater photographer at National Geographic, I would go in with a portfolio of maybe 20 or 25 pictures, and that portfolio of 25 pictures might have 5 different little stories. It would have 5 pictures from 5 different coverages, and it could be all very similar. It doesn't really matter. I mean, if you're a great macro photographer and you want to just do small animals, or you want to do big animals, I think that's less important. I think what the director of photography would be looking for is that you can shoot a story journalistically, that you are doing more than just making pretty pictures, that you actually understand the visual narrative and can tell a story in an editorial way. And
it really doesn't matter what that story is or how similar the stories are, because, you know, you're probably never going to, no one photographer at National Geographic is going to do it all. They need people who can do many different things. So, you know, we've got people who specialize in insects, or people who specialize in photomicroscopy, doing microscopic photography,
Yes.
or war photography, or, you know, lions and tigers, big cat photography. So, you know, to be specialized with a niche is actually, I think, an advantage these days. I mean, ultimately, it's important to be able to do many things. You might need to do people photography, or you might need to be able to do aerial photography or street photography. But if you can specialize, that's what's going to get their attention.
I see. Well, that's all very good information. Well, okay, so that's all the questions I have. Well, thank you very much. I think this will make for a very interesting
thank
article.
You very much, Jeremy. No, I really appreciate it. Really great questions. Thank you.